Okay. So we have
And
UI testing here, and that's for many people that's quite a finished product test. You don't necessarily start with UI test for a lot of people because it can be
yeah,
a little bit flaky. It can be sometimes hard to write, and
yeah,
often a more achievable goal is to start with a sort of simpler unit tests. Value in, value
right.
out. Does that going to work the way you expected? And actually, Philip Lazov has a question here saying, how do you balance UI testing breadth versus execution time? Because these XE UI
Yeah.
tests can take a long time to run. And it's true. Whereas unit
Oh
tests
yeah.
should be, in
Yeah.
theory, lightning fast.
Yes. So I think one good way to think about it is sort of at what point of building are you coming in? The if you don't have a facade to test to begin with, then you should be testing from the ground up. Then you should be following sort of that testing pyramid that's talking about like unit tests, integration tests, UI tests, sort of each one that's simpler you do more of, and each one that's more complex you do less of.
Mm.
That strategy of putting a scaffolding up on a facade only works if the facade already exists.
Yeah.
So it's more, if you're really sort of looking to get started with something and you have a application where you have a pretty good understanding of the code base, you feel like the code base is like reasonably well architected. Yeah, testing the ins and outs of something simple is a good place to start, where it's just like, okay, when I put this in, does the amount that I want come out? And it sounds like that's really dumb, but one of the key things about unit testing is being able to catch regressions. Basically being able to say, hey, this used to output 42 and now it outputs 41. Why is that? And being able to see that as soon as you have broken it is really, really helpful. And this is something where when people talk about like the time to invest in testing, this is where you sort of think about, okay, like if I'm writing code and then 3 months later somebody finds a bug in it, I have to then get back into the mentality that I was in when I was first writing that code 3 months ago. I've probably forgotten tons of context, and it's going to take me considerably longer to fix that bug than it would if I had a test that caught that bug immediately, and I would go, oh, I changed this thing over here, and then this started failing, and oh, those things are related in a way that I did not realize.
Right.
And, that still having that context makes that bug fix a lot faster.
Right.
And I think it's something that a lot of places super underestimate when they're sort of budgeting how much time should be allotted for tests, because it's definitely something where it's a little bit of eating your vegetables. It's a little bit of like, hey, you do this thing now, you're going to have a lot less trouble later.
Well, that's a great John Reed quote, is that tests give us the confidence to make bold changes to our code, because you can
for sure
rip and replace stuff if you want to, and as long as it's green before and green after, it's safe.
Yeah, for sure. And that's definitely, when you have a really good test suite, the ability to just sort of say, all right, just everything out the window and let's try this again, and does it still put out the same output? That's really helpful.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's where, if you're coming into a new code base that's already existing, I think one of the places that I think a lot of advice on testing falls down a little bit is that people are assuming that you're building something new. And personally, I don't usually come into projects that are new. I come into projects that have been built with varying levels of care. And, it's something where the question of how do I test this? How do I get this to a point that I want this to be, especially if it has no tests at all? You have to start from someplace known. And, there's definitely some tricks you can use. There's a great, Peter Steinberger has a great article about testing with KIF at ludicrous speed. And this works for XCUI too as well.
Great article, isn't it? It's a wonderful article.
Yeah. But ultimately what it comes down to is if you set the speed on your, I think it's the animation speed or something.
And the layer speed
on
too,
your main window.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you set that to 100, everything runs 100 times as fast, and it's amazing. It's definitely something where, that can shave a considerable amount of time off of a large UI test suite. And, also it's super fun to watch your computer just like, and just look like it's absolutely on crack. But it's definitely something where, I again, I think if you're starting from scratch, start with the test pyramid, and that's also true for adding a new feature to an existing code base. Start by testing, the smallest pieces of logic you have, then make sure those pieces of logic work together, then make sure that it shows up on screen the way that you want it to.
Yeah.
Because, each layer of those tests, as you go up that pyramid, the amount of time that it takes to write, the amount of time that it takes to run, all of that goes up. The more stuff that you can test without having to put anything on the screen, the better. But I think it is something where a lot of advice about testing starts from scratch and not from, hey, I got this giant nest of vipers from the previous developer who was abducted by aliens. I think my favorite one was I had colleagues who got a code base who they determined that the reason that they got the code base was because the previous developer was in jail for selling methamphetamines. And it's just like, yeah.
So you've mentioned a few times the problems with...
That's not ideal.